Hey guys, it's Flex here. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing Get Flanked's video a year back titled, Are Siege Players Getting Lazy or Are They Just Playing the Game Efficiently? So I'm just going to jump right into it, where Get Flanked introduced the video by saying that he was on his Logic Bomb podcast episode and he and Just Goat and Zeronic were discussing whether Siege players and their casual community in the Siege community. And this discussion did come up where he felt this is Get Flanked. He felt that Siege player base is getting lazy, or they're just not at all putting the effort in that they used to do before in prior years of Siege. Now I'm going to address each point that he makes in the video, hopefully in chronological order. However, I might switch freely between these points as I recall them or as I get my own points in memory. However, he he does make some points that are more general, but he titles them under specific points. So it kind of doesn't fit under those specific categories, but it's kind of more general if you can picture what I'm saying. So to begin with, his first point is titled New Maps. Regarding new maps in the game, Getflank's first observation was that the Siege community yells at developers for new content and then bans it when the new content is released to them. For this, I would say that he is right. He is right. I have to be fair, and I would like to also point out that the Siege community does ask for new content, and when new content does arrive, often it's not received well. So he is right about that. But are players justified in expressing their concern or expressing their disappointment at this new content? Or are they right in saying that they're not happy with it? In my opinion, they are justified in more cases than they are not justified. So when the Siege committee yells at developers for new content and then ban them, the thing is, regarding new maps, as far as new maps specifically are concerned, the new maps that are released in the game are mostly average at best, or they are straight up nightmares. So he makes the point that players ban it in ranked, you don't get to play it, especially if you're a solo queue player, you will not get to even have a chance to play the map in any meaningful way. Because since it's always banned, you won't get a chance to even load in and explore it in a competitive sense, let alone custom games where you can just load in and walk around and freely look at everything you want to. This alone springs up several points which I would like to contest, but let me just try and encapsulate what the core thing he's trying to say there, and let me just try to address that itself. The problem with their new maps is that they look aesthetically bland. All rooms have the same look, and for this, I would like to specially point at Nighthaven Labs. Every room kind of looks the same. The layout is a nightmare. The layout is not linear. It's not easy to look at. It's not easy to walk around in either, because you have walkways that are narrow, that are wide, walkways that don't go in straight lines. Some walkways go a bit diagonal. Some places don't even have walkways. Some places are just a one big circular room, especially in the basement. And some of them have smaller rooms, small cubbies, windows that you can jump through, double windows, and things of that nature. That makes a map extremely complicated. Not to mention you add hatches, you had all these other points of clutter in a map where there are things all over the place, there are points of cover. These things make a map more complicated for a new player to just visualize and just process when he just looks at it. This makes a map unpleasant to look at, and when you play it, it makes it frustrating to play in, especially as an attacker. It makes it frustrating because the defender can have the benefit of just sitting behind a piece of cover, looking at the obvious entry points, for example, the breachable walls. If you're looking at the basement, that's the breachable walls towards the outside. And if you're talking about if you're talking about the top floor, then you have the obvious breachable wall that overlooks the balcony, which overlooks the sea or whatever it is. So you can, as a defender, you can see where the attackers are going to come from. However, as an attacker, you have to start dissecting each point of clutter. You have to start looking at each single point and think there could be somebody here. You have to face check, assuming your drones don't survive the round. You have to face check 1,000 things simply because the map is designed that way. Older maps are not designed that way. Older maps are designed much more in a linear fashion. Rooms are bigger. Walkways are more linear and standard size that you would see in normal everyday life. On top of that, rooms look distinct from each other. So, for example, in Coastline, penthouse and theater are one theme. However, if you go to DJ, that's a separate theme. If you go to VIP, that's a separate theme. If you go to the hookah, billiards, that's a separate theme. So it becomes easier to remember what you're looking at, where people are, where things are, because maps of Coastline's age, as they were made by the older developers that had a better, I would say, fit and vision of how the game should be, and they were more in tune with the spirit of the game. They made the maps in that fashion, and all the old maps, the OG maps, those are easier to process. Even for newer players, they're easier to process, and I'm sure of that fact. In fact, I'm willing to bet on that. However, when it comes to newer maps, it's harder for people to understand what they're even looking at in the first place. That's one point. Second thing is, it doesn't make for entertaining gameplay, because clutter in the newer maps means that gameplay is very stop-start, whereas in the older maps, it's a bit more of a fluid situation. Especially, like I said, in Coastline, gunplay is very fluid, because engagements that you take are not can be in a bit more of an open setting, so there can be a bit of a dance. Whereas in the newer maps, it's very set-pieced. We'll come back to this point later in another heading. However, and that's my point regarding new maps. They're average at best, or they're straight up terrible. So when the Siege community yells at developers for not making new content, they want new content. They do ban it a lot. I agree, they do ban it a lot. However, the maps that they've been putting out are pretty bad, and they've been consistently pretty bad. The reworks have been okay. The reworks have been hit or miss. In most cases, they've been a hit. I personally like a lot of their reworks. However, their new maps, I feel like they try to prioritize aesthetics, and they don't nail that. And an aesthetic map doesn't make for a good gameplay of a map. And again, I circle back to Nighthaven. Nighthaven Labs has... it feels like Nighthaven Labs was designed with the whole point of putting an Assassin's Creed map in the game, just because it's an Ubisoft title. So I don't understand what Nighthaven Labs was meant to be. Emerald Plains is another one. Everything in Emerald Plains looks similar and looks the same. I'm still not able to figure out the second floor layout, because it's an extremely peculiar sort of design. There's a cutout in the middle, and there are some rooms which are divided in weird ways, and then there's a green side. That's all I can remember. There's a green side to the building, and then inside there's a study, and then there's a big library. So to me, it just looks like a remastered Bartlett University. And Bartlett University is not something to base a new map off, my opinion. I hope you get what I'm trying to say. That new maps, yes, people want new maps, but the new maps have to be better than this. The new maps have to be along the lines of Clubhouse, along the lines of Coastline, along the lines of Oregon, something like that. New maps inspired by those maps would make for a better content edition rather than these ones. So that moves on. That makes me move on to my next point. My next point is regarding the super casual players. So GetFlying says that super casual players are more likely to entertain the new map than hardcore players. I would say super casual players don't have a horse in the race. In my opinion, super casual players don't care about that stuff, because they get to play all their favorite maps anyway, which is Presidential Plain, Favela, and all these other maps that are completely just broken and are just known to be broken, but they're casual maps. So the casual community, I don't really think cares about having a new map to play in, as long as they get to play their favorites. And by far, they get to play any map that they want, because most maps are allowed there, except for maybe one or two that rotate in and out of the season. But they get to play all their favorites anyway. It's the harder core community, the community that tries to grind ranked, that tries to play at a more competitive level. They're the ones that would like to ban the newer maps, especially if they find them to be pretty bad. So that's not just because it's a new map. It's just because the fact that these maps are not good maps from the ground up. So you would likely find Emerald Plains being banned, Nighthaven being banned, and newer maps of that caliber being banned. However, you would find maps like Outback staying in. You'd find maps like Canal being in, even though Canal's a rework. But you would find newer maps that are reworks staying in because they're based off a good map already. Newer maps that are built from the ground up, especially by the newer dev team, because I'm sure that Ubisoft has rotated developers and had developers, the older developers, rotate off to different IPs and different other franchises to work on, and they've brought in new developers to work on Siege. The newer developers don't have the same spirit of the game in mind, or at least they don't have the right focus on. So when they make new maps, it's more of an aesthetic goal that they're trying to hit, rather than it being a fun map from the ground up. So that's why super casual players, I don't think they really care about having a new map or not. And the general population of the player base for sure cares about having new content, yes. But casual players aren't so fussed, in my opinion, if they don't have a new map to play in, because they already have tons of maps to play from, which offer tons of replayability value. It's the harder core community that wants to play new good maps. So the third point GetFlying talks about is the beauty of Siege. And I do agree, Siege's beauty is the fact that it has a lot of depth, a lot of tactical depth, a lot of strategic depth. However, at a certain point, it does get tiring to play that much depth and to consider so much variety. It does get tiring. It does get mentally taxing. The intricacies of Siege is what drew me to the game, and the intricacy of Siege is something that I still enjoy. However, I can see why newer players don't care about it as much anymore, or they just don't care about it at all. Or even older players, they stop caring at a certain point, because for a newer player, you just have to constantly learn things with each and every single patch, each and every single update, and that makes the game that's already pretty complicated to begin with even more complicated. And it means you're constantly playing catch up, and you have just so much to learn, so much to explore, that even if you sink 300 hours into the game, you've barely learned half the game. It just gets too daunting, and people just say, you know what? Let me just skip to the chase. Let me just cut straight to the meaty part of it, which is the gunfighting. Because at the end of the day, let's remember, Rainbow Six Siege is an FPS game. It's not an RTS. It's not a grand strategy. It's not Civilization. It's not Total War. It's not World of Warcraft. It's a first-person shooter game. It's all about going into a room, clicking heads. That's what it's all about. So when people skip the checklist and go straight to the gunfighting, I don't blame them. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it. Some days I do find it frustrating because, you know, sometimes I'm going through my checklist, and with 30 seconds into the round, 3 guys are dead, and it's 2v5. Yeah, it can be frustrating. I understand that. However, I don't blame them, because you're spending 2 minutes and 40 seconds off an entire round getting to that gunfight, trying to make it as easy as possible, and the gunfight itself lasts for, say, 5 seconds or less. That makes it, in some cases, in some ways, that just makes it seem futile to do a whole checklist when you could just skip to the real part of it and maximize what you enjoy, which is taking on gunfights in the game. You can have more gunfights the more you push. So the way I feel that this game really has kind of shot itself in the foot is that it just went down the rabbit hole of depth. At a certain point, this game went to overdrive, beyond which players feel it's too daunting to learn every single thing. It's too daunting for newer players. And for experienced players, for players that have played this thing for a long time, it gets tiring because it's like you're sitting a math exam every single match. You have to learn 10, 100,000 things about every single thing. You have to learn this side, that side. Okay, I got to learn the vertical angles. I got to learn what this is. I got to learn what that is. You have only so much energy and you can only keep up with that for so long before it gets, in some cases, boring. And in some cases, it can just wear you out. And when you reach that stage, you get to the point where you say, I want to just take gunfights. I will do the checklist. I won't do the whole checklist. I'll do parts of the checklist. Like, for example, okay, I will, let's say if my checklist is of, say, 25 steps, I'm going to do 5. After the 5th step, I'm just going to take on the gunfight. I'm just going to push and see what happens. And I respect that. I don't agree with it all the time, but I respect that because there's only so much you can do. That's what I would say. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much you can understand. There's only so much you can take. At the end of the day, we play these games for fun. We don't play these games to sit a math exam and write a PhD on it. So when he says that players don't want to do setups and breach walls, they do. I'm sure they do. And I still see people do want to breach walls. People still do want to do setups. People still want to do all these things. It's just people don't want to do these super elaborate setups that people earlier in the game, let's say in year 1 or year 2, would do. Because Siege at that point wasn't as deep as it is now. Now it's on a whole other level of depth. A much, much bigger monster than it used to be. I started playing this game in the season Alibi and Meister came out. And right now, the way Siege is compared to those days, it's night and day. This game right now has got so much depth. Like, I feel I could sit and talk about just how to attack one site for about 2 hours, and I still won't get through most of what you can do. Let's say if I sat down and said I want to talk about how I can attack Aviator Games Room in Villa, I would need 2 hours at least just to elaborate everything from one side, let alone from the other. Like if you breach from bedroom, let alone if you want to breach head on from study. So this game's got way too much depth to it, and players, they don't have all the time in the world. They don't have all the energy in the world, and sometimes they just want to get to what really matters, which is the gunfighting in an FPS game. Lastly, I would want to leave some kind of, I would want to float some kind of idea out there, which is regarding his point. But I want to circle back to the content point. He says that, of course, people yell at developers for not making enough content or not releasing new content. I feel like video game developers nowadays should entertain the possibility of releasing mod tools for their games, especially games like Siege. When you look at the kind of impact it's had on Counter-Strike and the fact that Counter-Strike games still hold up really, really well, and the fact that they not only allow people to mod, they welcome it and they fuse it into the game itself. In many ways, you just need to let the community make its own content, because the community, if it's passionate enough, will do it for free, number one. And number two, they will have a very good idea of what the community wants, because people in the community that make this content will be very familiar with the voices that are in that community. So the maps that they make and other changes that they make will be well received, or in a better position to be well received. In my opinion, let the community take charge of its own content creation. You can outsource that entire thing and not have to worry about it. The biggest thing that developers have to consider now is, oh, I have to stick to this roadmap. I have to release content every 2 months. I have to release this. I have to release this. I have to release this. And if they fall back on one thing, or if they succumb to pressure and they can't release it in, say, can't release season 1 because of XYZ or something happens, then you just get panned. You get destroyed. People talk lots of garbage about you. People say this and that, and they yell at you, and you get all kinds of abuse. However, if you let the community make its own stuff and you let the community mod the game, and you let the community take charge of its own content development, you're in a no-lose situation. You can only win. Not only do you save costs on on any of those things, but you also ensure that you don't get any of the negative backlash. And the lifespan of the game increases. As like I said, you can see in Counter Strike. Look at how long that game's been going on for, and how long that game will continue to go on for, because the community makes its own maps, the community makes its own stuff, and that means the player base is so invested into it that it's a juggernaut. It becomes a juggernaut on its own. I feel like Rainbow Six Siege should have community maps, not guns, operators, whatever. Let all those fly. At least maps. At least let the community make their own maps. The community, I bet, can make better maps than the developers can. I bet that the community will know exactly what stuff to have in a map compared to the developers, and they'll make more solid maps. Maybe if that's successful, you can let them design an operator too. Maybe they'll have an idea of what's a better idea for an operator. There are some really good ideas on Rainbow Six Reddit. I feel like those would be very cool operators to play. In some cases, let the community take some kind of a role in that. Maybe operators are too uh, far along this line. Maybe okay, don't do that. But at least maps. I feel like maps are the one thing the community can really nail if you let them have a chance at developing them and consistently having that avenue through mod tools. That's one thing. And the second thing I would say is this game needs to, in my opinion, needs to restart, needs to reboot, because all what Get Flank talked about is at its core, he is right that yes, people don't want to people don't want to breach walls, people don't want to do setups, people don't want to do these heavy strats and all these things, which you can only do when you have a full team. You can't do it if you're solo queuing. You can't strat anything anyway. And everything else is just too complicated and too deep for new players to take on, and it's too tiring for experienced players to do and experienced players to take on, because it gets too tiring and it's a game at the end of the day. The game needs to reboot, and this time reboot not with superhero abilities, because that's where superhero abilities lead to. They lead to never-ending depth, never-ending intricacies. That's why, for example, in comic books, you have comic books just explode and come and reboot all over again, because it gets too complicated, such that you can't even keep up with it anymore. You can't even fathom it anymore. It's too many layers. Same thing in Siege. Same problem in Siege. You need to start rebooting it, and this time, when you build a new game, you need to make sure that it's much simpler and its layers are much more integrated and less cluttery, in that, if you know what I mean. It needs to be neater in how they all line up on one another. So that's my final point of or recommendation in trying to improve this situation, is that make a new game, make it simpler, have tactical depth, but please don't include superior abilities. Let the game have more tactical depth as far as it can go along the lines of something like CSGO. That's a good inspiration to have. Having superhero abilities, it means that after a certain while, this thing will become too complicated and people just wouldn't be able to keep up, because at the end of the day, it's just it's just a never-ending math exam. So with that, that will wrap up my video, and I would like to say, if you like anything that you've seen, please do like and subscribe. If you have any feedback, please tell it to me in the comments. Whatever you think about whatever the points I made, please let me know in the comments, and I'll do my best to get back to them. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching.